good that our first service back in the sanctuary is this night, this most holy of nights, and I am grateful that you are here. The story we have heard and seen tonight is a reversal of the parade we saw on Palm Sunday. The cheering crowds and the palm branches are replaced with jeering mockery and a crown of thorns. The Romans did not use crucifixion for all criminals, although they used it for many of them. They used it primarily for political crimes, for people who were threats to order and stability. And while they were wrong in their understanding of who Jesus was and what his kingship would be, they were completely correct that he was a threat to their order and stability. The public and brutal parade of a tortured man carrying a cross through city streets was intended to be a deterrent to other would-be political agitators. Keith, should I switch to the other mic? I'm sorry, just a second. All right, I'll keep going, just tell me.
Switch.
Switch. Sorry, that sounded kind of echoey. This sounds better. Okay. So people wonder why God would do that, why God would allow the divine Son to die on a cross. And over the years, people have posited different ideas for what the cross says about God. That God needed a sacrifice, or that God let Jesus die in order to win a cosmic battle. But I think the Good Friday story says more about humanity than it says about God. As Mike McHarg put it, the cross was not God's invention, it was ours. It was on all our need for an eye for an eye. I have to wonder, he says, sometimes if God listened to us cry for blood and offered his own. Is Jesus' sacrifice on the cross was not to sate God's wrath, but to show God's response to ours. 2,000 years later, Imperial Rome is in our history books, but yet their parade continues. We reenact it and we liturgize it. We turn it into a counter-protest. We even wear their sign of torture as a piece of jewelry around our necks. While Caesar and Imperial Rome may be in the pages of history, the same forces that conspired to kill Jesus are active in the world today, oppressing men and women and children. We as a society participate in those systems, systems of economy, systems of race, systems of politics, systems that limit the flourishing of God's children, systems that subject people to violence and to danger. Good Friday is a remembrance and a subversion of the violence of humanity. It is also a time for us to pause and to claim our own place in the story. We might like to think we can live our lives without contributing to violence and injustice. We pretend it is far away from our lives while we're watching the trial of a police officer in Minneapolis. We can ignore the cries of pain in our own community. We pretend violence is not connected to our lives, even as protesters weep over the bodies of slain children. We seek to do the right things, and we try not to be racist, but we live our lives in an economy built on slave labor and Jim Crow laws and unfair housing policies, and the list goes on. We try to care for our environment. We drink fair trade coffee, we buy local food, we drive hybrid cars, we notice the labels on our clothing so we know where it was made, and those are all good and noble things to do. But do we know if children made our phones in countries with unjust labor practices? Did the people who harvested our vegetables get paid a fair wage? How can we attend to all of those decisions in a global world? We are part of a big and complex system. We are a part. And so we bear witness to the cross of Jesus, and we own our own place in the story. I think of Simon of Cyrene. We're told he was a passerby who was coming in from the country. We don't even know if he knew he was on Rome's parade route that day when he came in from his farm to do business. He had sons named Rufus and Alexander, so he was likely not Jewish because those are not Jewish names. And he found himself carrying a cross, not as a volunteer, as I had tonight, but he was carrying it as a person in the wrong place at the wrong time. Like Simon of Cyrene, we are not immune to the forces that compel us to participate in parades of violence. What was on Simon's mind as he bore the weight of someone else's cross? Was he glad he could take the burden of it from Jesus, who must have been too weak after his abuse to carry it himself? Or was he afraid he would be killed if he said no, denying the instruction to take it up? Simon of Cyrene reminds us of another Simon, Simon Peter, who had been instructed by Jesus to take up his cross and follow. Peter, at this point in the story, had already denied Jesus 3 times. What is he thinking as he hides in the crowd while another Simon, a stranger, carries the cross of his rabbi, his teacher, his friend? Earlier in the gospel, Jesus tells the crowds, and he tells us, if any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. When I read those verses earlier in the story, it seems like a voluntary choice. It's a good and brave decision we could make for Jesus. In the midst of the Good Friday story, though, our choices seem to fall by the wayside with our denials and our betrayals. And the cross becomes something forced upon us by outside forces. It is a weight we carry at someone else's insistence because we participate in an unjust world. At the end of the story, we're told a Roman soldier was witness to Jesus' last breath. What did he have eyes to see? It says that he saw that in this way Jesus breathed his last. And he said, truly, this man was God's son. Now, I don't want to overly romanticize this Roman soldier's profession of faith. He was not there as a follower or a convert. We don't know what he thought of Jesus of Nazareth before this moment. He was there on the clock. He was working for Rome, perhaps compelled by his own political or economic realities to be there. It's worth noting that in Mark's gospel, full of people who are told to be quiet when they proclaim who Jesus is, this, at the end of the story, is the first profession of faith that is not silenced. Perhaps because the one who told people to keep quiet has now been silenced himself. Or perhaps the soldier's statement is left to ring out across history because it is in the crucifixion that we know truly this man was God's son. As we heard the story tonight, we also heard the psalm that Jesus quotes from the cross. Psalm 22 begins with, my God, why have you forsaken me? Psalm 22 does not end there, however. Verses of pain and loss are woven through with verses of hope and promise. Jesus, by quoting this psalm, intended for the people who heard it to remember the rest of the story. The forsakenness of the world does not get the final say. Posterity will serve God, and future generations will be told about the Lord and proclaim his deliverance to a people yet unborn, saying that God has done it. In a few minutes, we will go out into the darkness of Good Friday, trusting that the spectacle and horror of the cross is not the final word God will speak. So let us listen in prayer and in silence this holy weekend, so that we may have ears to hear the good news on Easter morning. Amen.